Raise your hand if your fertility journey has not gone exactly as planned. I know that there are hands going up everywhere right now, in cars, in kitchens, on morning walks, in offices. Maybe you've been trying for months or years and just haven't had any success. Or maybe you've gotten pregnant easily before, but now you're facing loss after loss. Or maybe you're just starting out and nothing is working the way that you thought it would. Here's what's wild. About 1 in 6 couples struggles with fertility, and that number is increasing. It's way more common than most people think. But you know what? That number doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't show the nights you've cried yourself to sleep, or how hard it is to scroll through social media, seeing pregnancy announcement after pregnancy announcement. I'll be honest with you. I used to think I had this whole fertility thing figured out. Seriously. Both times I wanted to get pregnant, boom, first try, healthy pregnancy, healthy baby. Sure, my birth stories were a little crazy, but everything else was smooth sailing. Let's just say I felt pretty damn confident about the whole thing. Then, this year hit me like a ton of bricks. When I got pregnant with my 3rd baby, I thought it would be the same story. Different chapter, but same happy ending, right? Wrong. Well, after that loss, I picked myself up and I tried again. I got pregnant right away, again. But this time I lost the baby even further along. And just like that, my whole story changed. Let me tell you something I've learned the hard way. Your body doesn't care if you've had easy pregnancies before. It doesn't care about your perfect timing or your vision board or your 5-year plan. Some of us struggle for years to see that first positive test. And others, like me, get blindsided by loss after things have been pretty easy. Some of us dive deep into fertility treatments, while others just keep hearing those frustrating words, unexplained infertility. But here's the truth, and I want you to really hear this. There's no competition in this pain. Whether you've been trying for 5 years, or you've had multiple losses in 1 year, whether you're just starting this journey or you feel like you're losing hope, your story matters. Your pain is real. And that tiny spark that you're holding on to, keep holding on. You know what blows my mind? Studies show that dealing with fertility issues can be just as stressful as getting a cancer diagnosis. Yet we're supposed to just deal with it. Show up to baby showers, smile through another round of, "So when are you having kids?" Keep it together when your cousin announces her oops baby. But what if we did this differently? What if instead of suffering alone, we shared our stories? What if this thing that feels like it's breaking us is actually making us stronger and more real and more connected to what really matters? Now, stick with me here, because I'm not about to give you some oversimplified, just think positive advice. I've been where you are. And I know that when you're in the depths of loss, or you're riding the monthly roller coaster of hope and disappointment, nothing feels worse than someone minimizing your experience with empty platitudes. But here's what's fascinating. There actually is a deeper scientific connection between our minds and our fertility that goes way beyond just relaxing or reducing stress. The latest research shows that our thoughts and beliefs can create real, measurable changes in our bodies. Changes that can either support or hinder our fertility journeys. And while mindset alone isn't a magic fix, it is a really crucial part of the fertility puzzle that most people completely overlook. Today, our guest is Dr. Gabriella Rosa. She is a world-renowned fertility specialist who's helped thousands of couples overcome what seemed like impossible odds to create their families. With over 2 decades of experience, she brings together cutting-edge reproductive science with a really deep understanding of how our mental and emotional states impact our fertility. So in this episode, you will learn the science-backed connection between your mindset and your fertility, and why most doctors never mention this. Specific action steps that you can take right now to optimize your fertility journey, and how to transform your relationship with your body from adversary to ally, even when you feel like it's failing you. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You guys, workplace stress is killing us. 61% of people are dealing with stress levels that are way beyond normal. So if you're feeling it, you are not alone. I used to think I could just push through everything, work harder, sleep less, pretend I had it all figured out. But that approach nearly broke me. I am all about following your joy. If that voice in your head is telling you to make a change, listen to it. Maybe you are ready to quit your job. Maybe you do need to flip your whole life upside down. But either way, you need support and tools to navigate it well. And that's where therapy comes in. Modern therapy teaches you how to set boundaries without feeling guilty, how to manage anxiety before it spirals, how to make big moves from a place of strength instead of desperation. And BetterHelp has over 30,000 therapists and has helped 5 million people worldwide. And you can talk to someone from your couch. No waiting rooms, no awkward scheduling. Therapy gives you the clarity on whether that voice telling you to make a change is your intuition or just the Sunday scaries. But either way, you deserve support. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/mindlove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove. I was just talking to a friend who's been trying to hire someone for 3 months. 3 months! She's been posting on random job boards, scrolling through resumes that make no sense, getting ghosted by candidates. It's a mess. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the very top of the page for your relevant candidates so that you can reach the people that you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it just makes hiring so fast because you're not wasting time on platforms where nobody's actually looking. Your job gets in front of real candidates who are actively searching. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? Well, in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
We did a study which was part of my master's in public health at Harvard, and we were looking at our results across the clinic and across our program. And what we noted was that before coming to us, 51.5% of patients had experienced miscarriage. After treatment, we had a miscarriage rate of 13.5%. So we noted a dramatic decrease in miscarriage risk and certainly miscarriage rate of the people that we treated. And the reason is very, very simple. We actually take the time to figure out all of the possible reasons as to why miscarriages are occurring.
Turn up your frequency with MindLove. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So what led you down the life path of helping people with fertility?
It's a great question. And even to this day, when I ask myself that question, of course, there were the momentous occasions of life, that happened and that kind of brought me down this path. The first was being diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome at the age of 18. It was a very nonchalant doctor on the other side of the phone line, literally just saying, "Oh yes, your blood tests have come back and you have polycystic ovarian disease." And I remember stopping for a whole minute going, in my mind, what does this mean? And he probably was still talking, but I was just really kind of taken aback because the first thought that I had in my mind was, am I going to die? At the time, didn't really know very much about what it meant, or essentially what the repercussions or implications of having polycystic ovarian disease would be. And so I literally asked. I said, like, is that very serious? Am I going to die? And he goes, no, you're probably just never going to have children. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting follow-up
He's so
to the
kind.
disease piece. I know. I know. I'm like, okay, that's the kind of thing that you tell an 18-year-old. So you don't know how they're going to take it, but hey, just spill it out over the phone. So I think that was the first instance where I thought, gosh, there has to be a better approach, to care and patient-centered care. And at the time, I didn't have those words to put around it, but I really felt like, gosh, really, this is as good as it gets. And then, of course, I started studying, and I decided to kind of venture down the path of nutrition, and very quickly realized that that wasn't going to be, there's only so many times that you can tell somebody that they need to eat a vegetable to be healthy, and they don't do it for years at a time. And you go, well, okay, that didn't quite work as well as I would have expected. That I decided, that naturopathic medicine was something that was more along the lines of, feeling like it was very natural still, but that had more to intervene with, herbal medicines, nutritional supplementation, all of those things kind of called to me in terms of like preventative health. And that was really very much where my mind started to go. It's like I remember telling my mom when I was very young that I wanted to die healthy. So preventative medicine really did speak to me, and that's how it all began. And then very quickly, in I guess the first kind of 6 months after graduating, I was working for an obstetrician gynecologist for 6 years as I was studying. And he said, oh, if you want to practice from here. And I was like, oh, that sounds lovely. And because the types of patients that used to go there were people who were trying to get pregnant or who were pregnant. And, I used to see the babies all coming in, and very cute, 6-week-old little angels, and thought, oh, maybe pediatrics would be a good idea. And my boss at the time literally turned around to me and said, that is the worst idea you've ever had. And I'm like, oh, thanks for being so kind too. And he said, your patients, if you're working with pediatrics, your patients don't speak, and your patients are your parents' patients. So, your patients are the parents of the patient. It's very difficult to be able to kind of, and I realized that, and that's then how I decided that, okay, I still like babies, and I still have a passion for, doing some kind of preventative work. And I started working with women's health a whole lot more. And women's health led to the next thing, which was women having, difficulty conceiving, difficulty keeping pregnancies to term. And so very quickly after that, I started to see a lot of patients in my clinic who were having a lot of challenges getting pregnant. And that's how it really started. Like within 3 years of graduating, I was pretty much seeing 50% of my patients were women who were having difficulty conceiving. And that led to, getting more referrals of those types of women. And I think probably when I was about 10 years into my career was the very first time that I got a referral that I was really kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can help this, which was a lady who had been referred to me who had had 10 years of infertility and had done multiple failed IVF cycles, and basically came to me because she was like, you know what? We're going to try one more time. And if we don't get pregnant, we're just going to give up. And at the time, I remember really kind of thinking, gosh, 10 years, that's a lot of years. I probably at that stage had been treating people with 2-3 years of infertility. And when she said 10 years, I actually ended up saying to her, I said, listen, I don't think 10 years is something that I can help because I haven't done it before. And she goes, well, I have nothing to lose because if I don't do this, I'm not going to have a baby anyway. So the worst thing that can happen is that I can be healthier. And I thought, you've sold me. And so that's how I ended up treating this lady. And within 4 months, she was pregnant. And I was like, okay, maybe that was a fluke. And, maybe that's just like it was just a random occurring. So I kind of, thought, okay, that's amazing for this couple, but I don't know if this is replicable. And then another couple walked into my door that had been trying for 19 years. And at that point, I was like, look, I really don't know, but this is the situation that has just happened, and we can try. Long story short, we did, and several months later, she was pregnant and had her baby for the first time, again after doing multiple failed IVF cycles and other natural treatments. So then that's when I started to. It actually was the thing that made me very curious about, okay, if this is possible in these kinds of very long-standing time to pregnancy and cases of infertility, what else is possible? And so then after that second couple who came to me in that kind of situation, I decided that I was only going to take on patients who had been infertile or had difficulty conceiving for more than 2 years. And that's how a whole new era of my career began. Because in 2013, I made that shift, and we have since only treated people with very difficult cases, very complex cases, long-standing infertility, recurrent miscarriage. And that's what led to many of the things that we're doing today. And certainly Fertility Breakthrough, the book, Overcoming Infertility and Recurrent Miscarriage, is just free, lots of places around the web and, available in bookshops and stuff like that. I tell those stories, but it would have never have happened had it not been for those two initial cases where it really took my entire career in a whole new trajectory. So that's, I guess, a long, long way of describing how it all started, but that's really how it all started.
That's so incredible. And what a gift to be able to give people. I shared my story in episode 369, and I just know the feeling of that longing. And one thing I haven't had to go through yet is the feeling of not being able to get pregnant, not having your body do something that you so want it to do. I do know the feeling of loss, which I don't know which one would be harder, but I know both are very, very difficult emotional journeys. And I feel like so often people aren't taking this whole body approach to fertility. What are some of the lesser known things that can affect fertility in both men and women?
It's a great question. And so often, the reason that I guess, modern medicine has a lot to answer for why people disconnect body parts, and if we think about how it all started, medicine really started in a battlefield, right? Where the number one objective was to get soldiers back onto the field as quickly as possible. So it started to compartmentalize different bodies and body parts and body systems to be able to actually do that job as quickly as possible. The problem, I guess, that we have today is that continued, and that's those subspecializations have become even more subspecialized to the point where, if we look at a part of the body that is not working as effectively as it could, or a body system, it's almost like that body system is viewed under the lens of it being an isolated part of the entire body. And the truth is that there is absolutely not a single part of the human body or a single cell that works in isolation. So, when we're coming back to treating fertility, we expect, and certainly IVF treatments and medicine looks at, getting the egg, getting the sperm, we have an embryo, voila, we should have a baby. Except that 70% of IVF cycles still fail. And so we've got to come back and question, okay, if 70% of cycles don't work, what is it that we need to look at, and how could we prevent that from happening? And I often talk to my patients about this idea that a healthy body is a fertile body. And this is not about being, crunchy or overly natural in the tendencies of treatment. It's actually it's good medicine, right? When we can ensure that the body is in optimum health in every possible way, every other bodily system and biochemical process will work better. So when people think about, what are the things that are affecting my ability to keep a pregnancy to term or even for conception to occur, we really have to take into consideration the entire exposome. And the exposome, the fertility exposome, is really all of the things that we are in contact with in our day to day, and what kind of impact do those exposures have on our body's ability to do what it needs to do. Let me give you an example of this in a different context. We've all heard of people who have never smoked a day in their life and died of lung cancer. And we've also heard of people who essentially are chain smokers and who never develop cancer whatsoever, right? And so we then have to question, okay, well, it's the same substance, right? How is it that that same substance can impact two different people in a completely different or opposite way, so to speak? And then that's when the field of epigenetics started to actually be able to answer that question. So epigenetics looks at how is it that a solution, a toxin, an exposure of some kind affects switching on or off certain genes in the body, right? Because the reason as to why somebody might smoke their whole life and not develop lung cancer is that they are genetically predisposed in a different way to someone who does. Fertility has a similar impact. You may notice that in the majority of the population out there, most people conceive without trying. And this is where, when it comes to infertility, we often think about, oh, wow, it's something that affects a lot of people. But what's a lot of people? Well, 1 in 6 couples experiences some kind of fertility problems. 1 in 4 couples experience miscarriages, or 1 in 4 pregnancies actually end in miscarriage. Sometimes a woman doesn't know about it, right? And so miscarriages can occur very early on before you even have a positive pregnancy test. But when you're looking at those different situations, you then have to ask, okay, why is it that in the general population, most people conceive without trying? The messaging that we have from school, for example, is still very much the same. It's that whole thing of like, wait, if you get pregnant, it's going to be the end of your life. It's going to destroy your life. You need to use contraception. And if when you actually then want to get pregnant and the reverse is true, i.e., this is now the moment and I really want to make sure that this happens, most of the time women will go off the pill and they will be pregnant in a couple of cycles. The everything is normal, just keep trying is actually not the truth when a couple is not experiencing that kind of situation. So let me put it to you this way. If a woman is trying to get pregnant already, it's possible that there are factors that we need to take into consideration in that particular situation. Because for the majority, it's not going to be necessary. In fact, at peak fertility, a couple has an average 3 cycles time to pregnancy. So it's literally have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation. Then the other kind of proportion of the population where we are having this conversation, it's typically because there are things that are getting in the way. And the truth is that we don't know what it is that is impacting a single person or a particular couple until we start to dive deep into what it is that they are predisposed to, or what are the types of things that is going to make a difference in their particular situation. And that takes diagnostics. Now, there are lots of things that we can think about from a different lens that I like to talk to my patients about, which is this. Let's imagine for a moment that you are pregnant right now, right? Most women will have a lot of ease thinking about that. Guys sometimes struggle a little bit more to think about or imagine being pregnant, right? But it applies to them too, because right now, both women and men are carrying 50% of that little baby that they're going to be creating, right? So what we're wanting is for those cells to find each other and kind of become intertwined, so to speak. But if you were pregnant right now, immediately, I think that most women, especially if you've been pregnant before, you will have a list of things that you would absolutely start doing or that you would absolutely stop doing if you were pregnant at this moment, right? So all of those things are the things that couples and individuals need to start doing or stop doing even before a pregnancy is in place. Does that make sense? So when you ask me, what is it that people should be aware of? What is it that people should be concerned about if they're wanting to either prevent miscarriage, increase the chances of getting pregnant? In general terms, in terms of self-care, the same things that you would do if you wanted to be pregnant and if you were pregnant right now is essentially the types of things that you would want to be aware of.
Let me ask you something. How much time did you spend last week thinking about what to eat? Planning meals, making grocery lists, wandering around the store like a lost tourist. I used to waste entire Sunday afternoons on this, and it was exhausting. Then I found Hungry Root. Hungry Root fills your cart with personalized picks and plans your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. They have over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, and most are ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm actually headed to Michigan this week, and I had my Hungry Root order delivered there. So I already know that I have meals ready and plenty of snacks for the kids without scrambling to find a grocery store. It's just handled. And what I love most is their smart cart technology. It learns what I actually like and then recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements just for me. So no more buying spinach that rots in my fridge. They screen out over 200 additives and only source high quality ingredients. The time I've gotten back has just been life-changing. So take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE. I didn't realize that, well, I found this out after I was pregnant the first time. So much that I found out after getting pregnant. There's like no education around it before. And so then you're just going in blind. I feel like I would have done so much better in my first pregnancy if I would have known all of this. I'm even finding out things now. My first pregnancy was, well, my first birth was very difficult. It was 52 hours. I transferred from a birth center to a hospital, and I thought I was going to have a fairly easy. Well, I was curious about what kind of labor I was going to have because I have very small hips, so that was a concern for some reason. And then I also do a lot of yoga, so I was like, maybe this will really help. I am finding out that yoga, horseback riding, CrossFit are all things that actually lead to difficult labors. I thought it would have been the opposite. But I know a few people that work in those areas and they're like, oh yeah, it's the worst because you actually don't know how to relax your pelvis. Anyways, lots of misconceptions that I'm finding out now. And it's funny because my second, I didn't do a lot of yoga. I did mostly walking, and apparently that and belly dancing are like the two things you should do. Anyways, but
and it could also be that you had one child, and so your body kind of learned what to do. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there was this forum going of people that were like sharing about what workouts helped, and then it was sort of finding out within it. Wait, I do a lot of yoga. I had a horrible birth. And so there was just all these women coming together, like having this realization, and then all these like birth workers, whether they're hospital or doulas, all started chiming in. Oh yeah, we see this all the time. So it's like interesting. But another one was even around like taking a prenatal. Take it when you are trying to get pregnant versus when you actually are.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting? I think that I think it's worth mentioning the fact that, and again, kind of underlining almost what I said before, which is the fact that often it is until or not until a person has had difficulties that it becomes or that comes onto their radar to start looking at those types of situations. Wouldn't it be wonderful if sex ed at school actually included useful information for life? Like I think that it's it would be such a revolutionary approach to really educate people on things that they need to know, and health literacy and fertility literacy and all of those things. I think it would reduce so much of the trauma that young couples can experience when things don't quite go to plan.
Yeah, instead of wasting a whole day putting a condom on a banana. Do they still do that? I don't know.
Yeah, they do.
uh, what when you said the first step, well, once you've once the diagnostics are necessary, what is the most common finding that you see when running diagnostics on people struggling with fertility?
It depends on, you see, it would be interesting. Obviously, the primary things that, are ruled out in terms of standard diagnostics are things like tubal infertility. So whether the fallopian tubes are working or not, that's something that will be checked typically very quickly. And hopefully, the problem is, and let me just backtrack a little bit, because I think that this is an interesting thing that we do need to discuss, because I often talk to women who are young, say, in their early 20s, and they basically go to their doctors because they want to be pregnant, um, within a certain period of time. And there's different reasons for that. But, like I spoke to a couple of women this year where one was 21, the other one was 22. They were already trying for a couple of years each to get pregnant, and had gone to their doctors and literally had been dismissed by their doctor, as to, it being something that they should concern themselves with, i.e. the fact that they weren't pregnant after 2 years of trying consistently and timing cycles and doing all of those things. And the reason really is because, like, doctors will dismiss patients for two major reasons across their life, reproductive life cycle. When they're too young, or when they're young, say, they will say, you know what, you're young, you have time, you don't have to worry about this now. Or if they're older, because then what happens is that they're just told, oh, you know what, you're too old. Your egg is no good anymore. You're probably not going to be able to have a baby. So unless women really advocate for themselves and understand that they really have to advocate for themselves, unfortunately, they get very poor healthcare treatment. Right now, in the middle of that, which is that kind of, that time frame where women have been trying for 12 months is the usual guideline, and nothing has worked, they basically will then go to their doctor, and their doctor will do the basic tests, which is, are you ovulating? Are your fallopian tubes clear? And do we have sperm? Like, those are the three basic things that essentially will be done. Yes, typically they will be checked for STIs, not always. It's very inconsistent across healthcare systems. We treat patients globally. We treat patients mostly in the US, UK, Australia. Our clinic uses telehealth and has been for, gosh, the longest time. We started doing telehealth appointments in 2003. In 2013, we switched completely to telehealth. So we have visibility across multiple healthcare systems around the world. And it's sad because I see this in almost literally in every continent, right? Where this rhetoric happens, where women go for trying to get help when things aren't working, and they're literally either kind of like turned away or ignored, or just the bare basics are done and nothing else is looked at. And that's a real problem because, like I said, categorically, typically, it's literally those three or four things that are going to be looked at, and everything else is disregarded. But those are not the only reasons as to why couples have difficulty conceiving or keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. There's a whole multitude of other health challenges or conditions or diagnoses that often get overlooked because, well, that separation of organs and body systems, that occurs that we've talked about earlier. So that's really problematic. But those are the kind of basic things that through healthcare systems around the globe, most patients can expect that will be looked at, and lots of things left behind.
You mentioned keeping a pregnancy to term, and I have shared about my 2 miscarriages this year. The second one was a chromosomal abnormality. I'm not sure about the first. Is that just age that increases that likelihood, or are there anything else that increases the likelihood of a chromosomal abnormality?
Yeah, look, I mean, of course, making sure that both parents are karyotypically normal, right, in terms of their genetic material, is going to have an effect on whether a baby is genetically normal or not. Then there is the other factor that I talked about, which is epigenetics. So by no means age is the only factor here, but it's about, really then understanding what are some of the other factors that could be playing a role and what it is that we need to understand if we are to really be able to learn what are the causes. Because, for example, in terms of miscarriages, there are multiple category reasons. Like I've categorized this in different ways over the years, but there's like at least 7 different really big specific things that I would recommend that need to be kind of ruled out. Genetic factors are definitely going to be a part of it, and usually they are quite common, but they can arise from the egg or sperm. So it's not, and also it can be because of the actual embryonic development. So it's, there are various reasons as to why that could occur. But then there's anatomical issues, uterine abnormalities will make a difference here. Like you could have fibroids, or you can have adhesions from different surgeries, or from endometriosis, or, other things that have happened. Like uterine deformations, or, deformities like septate uterus, for example, where it's shaped in a different way, that can increase the risk of miscarriage for sure. Then you have things like, hormonal imbalances. Hormonal imbalances are a real typical reason as to why miscarriages may occur. And it can range from thyroid hormonal imbalances to, progesterone levels being low. And progesterone levels can be low because of many different reasons. Like we know that when it comes to fertility, you have the way in which the body releases the egg is also going to make a difference in terms of timing, but also in terms of the size of the corpus luteum, which is the part that is left behind from the ovulatory follicle that produces progesterone. So if we have, for example, a hormonal imbalance that leads to an egg not maturing as effectively or as well as it would need to, then that can impact your progesterone production. And progesterone production will be really a big impact when it comes to miscarriages, and immunological factors is another one, right? So it can be things like autoimmune conditions, from, antiphospholipid syndrome, which basically increases clotting in the system, and that also is a very big contributing factor for recurrent miscarriages. Infections is another one. So you can have sexually transmitted infections, like I've mentioned before. That's why one of the things that really does get tested is that. But something that's often not really taken into consideration, and that really needs to, is, for example, bacterial vaginosis associated bacteria, right? If a woman has ever had bacterial vaginosis, she is potentially could have that bacteria, in her uterine cavity, which essentially means that when she has unprotected intercourse, it can also pass on to her partner. It can impact sperm parameters, but it can then also, the impact on sperm parameters itself can actually increase the risk of miscarriage. One of the things that is often not known, like you've said before, Melissa, as you're saying, like the things that I didn't know before I experienced these things, is that 50% of the reasons as to why a miscarriage occurs is actually because of male factor. So sperm plays a huge role here too, not just in terms of conception, but in terms of keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. And then you have, all of your lifestyle, environmental factors that, smoking, alcohol, drug use, environmental toxins, all of these things can also play a role in terms of miscarriages. So it's hard to say, when somebody is experiencing a miscarriage or have experienced recurrent miscarriages, more than 3, it's hard to just talk to the person and say, oh, it's because of these reasons. You can't. Nobody can do that. Like if a doctor says to you, oh, you've experienced a miscarriage, oh, it's because of your age, and they haven't done all of these other things to really understand what actually is happening for that couple, they probably just don't have more than 5 minutes to ask questions and to have conversations, right? And so what happens is that a lot of patients are dismissed in that kind of way too. It's like, oh, you're 38 and a half. Well, it's because of your age. Well, No. Have you actually done all of these tests? Laundry list long. No, but we don't need to, because that's the most likely thing that happens at this age. Therefore, that's what it is. And it's not. And, we can show this in our clinic. We did a study which was part of my master's in public health at Harvard, and we were looking at our results across the clinic and across our program. And what we noted was that before coming to us, 51.5% of patients had experienced miscarriage. After treatment, we had a miscarriage rate of 13.5%. So we noted a dramatic decrease in miscarriage risk and certainly miscarriage rate of the people that we treated. And the reason is very, very simple. We actually take the time to figure out all of the possible reasons as to why miscarriages are occurring. And we do that very proactively. We don't wait like you normally would expect, in the kind of like general healthcare system to have at least 3 miscarriages to start investigating. We will start investigating at the time that somebody actually has not seen a pregnancy test for more than 2 years, or 1 or more, because we know that you're not always going to see a positive pregnancy test and then have a miscarriage. The most likely thing that happens for people who have long-standing time to pregnancy, quote unquote, is that the fertilization piece is happening, implantation is failing, right? And then chemical pregnancies are more likely, i.e., you see a positive pregnancy test today, tomorrow you don't, or early stage miscarriages, i.e. under 12 weeks. Right? So all of those things are things that we would have to, and that we do take into consideration to be able to get the answers that our patients deserve, not just, go and say, oh, it's because of your age or it's because of your egg quality. Well, that's not helpful to anybody as far as I'm concerned.
That was a struggle I had with the second one. They only do have a few minutes, and I'm sitting there feeling like my life is over. In that moment, just the shock. I wasn't expecting it. I felt like I was in the green, which I've then found out that so many people deal with it at that time. I remember after my first one, I thought, oh my gosh, can't believe people deal with this later on. So glad that's not me. And then I did. I had that experience. I had the baby bump with no baby anymore. And it was so difficult. And both the ultrasound technician and the doctor were just like, well, you're 39. This becomes more common. And if you can't tell by the subject of this podcast, I'm very into mindset. And so even if that's what the trends show, I don't want to adopt the belief that my age is a factor. I do everything to live intentionally and to feed my body well and drink well. Like, I'm one of the most intentional people that I know when it comes to health. And so I'm just like, I don't even think I know, according to my Aura ring, my heart is 12 years younger than my age. So I don't see why my uterus can't be either. And so I just am curious though, because I feel like that does so much damage to people. Then they internalize this belief, and we already know stress affects pregnancy. So how do you see people's beliefs or their state of mind affecting their ability to get pregnant?
Yeah, I love that. And I often say to my patients, and I believe that there certainly is an impact. I think that what we believe and what we internalize will in some way or another manifest itself at some point in time. At the same time, I approach it from the perspective that stressing about stressing doesn't help. Right. And so I want people to also be really conscious of the fact that as much as, yes, stress plays a role in reproduction, in the ability to keep a healthy pregnancy to term, in the ability to conceive and so on, there are plenty of people in war zones who are having babies. Right. So I try and put it in context for my patients, because particularly for the patients that I treat, it's not something that they've been experiencing for 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. Usually it's a long time, right? The average in our study, the average time of infertility of the patients who came to us was 4 years. So, it's a huge amount of time. And imagine not wanting to and not being able to conceive for 4, 6, 7, 10 years plus, right? So that stress becomes internalized. It's no longer the acute level of stress that you can actually recover from quickly. It becomes a really chronic piece of experience in these people's lives. So it's almost like I have to do the opposite work of relearning and reteaching that yes, we need to think about this differently, and yes, it's almost like we have to not think about it at all, right? To give it the best possible chance. So in order to just like, kind of answer the question very briefly, yes, it makes a difference, and yet it makes no difference. And that's really how we have to think about it. Like the being intentional about it, I think is super critical, right? Because there's only so much that we can influence. Yet what we can influence is pretty big. So if we can look at it from the perspective of do your part and the heavens will come to your aid, I like that approach, right? Because there's only so much that we can control on a journey to parenthood. There's only so much that we can actually change, and yet there is so much we can do, right? There is so much we can change. But if we're going to stay fixated on a mindset and not do the things that we can do to help ourselves, well, guess what? Then, of course, you're not going to change. And if you just do a whole bunch of things, but you are doing too many things that are completely disconnected, you also are not going to get a result. Let me put it to you this way. Sometimes people come to me and they are all about, having the right mindset or the right attitude. But when it comes to eating healthy and exercising and maybe taking the right nutrients or whatever else can also help them, or like going to do the right diagnostic tests, they're basically like, oh, no, I don't need to do any of those. I'm just going to have a good mindset. Well, I think you're leaving a lot on the table, right? Because having a good mindset includes doing the things that you can actually have, I don't even like to say control, that you can take charge of, right? So doing those parts is going to be just as important as having a good mindset. A good mindset on its own doesn't change medical diagnoses that we need to address. It doesn't change the fact that somebody might have critical nutritional deficiencies, or they might have certain infections, or they might have, some other factors that need to be addressed in terms of their health. So I think we can't separate those things. I think that they need to be utilized in a unison that's going to further really kind of having the foundation that's necessary of mindset, emotional, kind of balance and some kind of way of processing the challenges that we need to process, but also is kind of struck by the balance of doing things that are going to make a difference. Does that make sense?
It
I
does.
think that we can't separate those things is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I feel like you outlined the people who read the book or watched the movie The Secret and they're still waiting for all their manifestations to show up at their door and not realize that you have to meet it with action.
Exactly. And I think that that's you've put it perfectly, actually. Thank you.
When it comes to nutritional deficiencies, are they completely unique, or do you see any that are more common than the others? When it comes to nutritional deficiencies, are they completely unique, or do you see any that are more common than the others?
Look, I think that there are some that are more common than the others because they get more tested than the others, right? And so, things like your iron, your B12, your folate, your vitamin D, those nutritional deficiencies are typically tested frequently, because we know the impact on a public health level. We know the impact of those particular nutrients being deficient and how that negatively impacts health across the life cycle. But then there are other things that just don't get tested. And so we don't know. Is it because those foods are more readily available and therefore, there's less risk of deficiency? Not necessarily. It's just that they're basically, testing is expensive, right? And the type of testing that you're going to kind of roll out to an entire population is going to have a huge cost on a healthcare system and on a country's kind of budget, right? So then that's where these tests become kind of limited to a few, or limited to, like you can test everything and anything, but then how much you actually of that information, how much you can operationalize to improve health, and the level of impact of health improvement that you can measure from just testing single nutrients is also very minimal, right? So typically, when you're looking at population interventions, you're not going to see a lot of these, kind of major nutritional tests being rolled out or done, because they're expensive and because you have multivitamins that are available to kind of remedy, any major kind of deficiencies. And typically, when it comes to cost effectiveness in healthcare systems, what we're looking at is, if you're going to treat anyway, why test, right? And things that are simple, for example, that's why women are told to have a prenatal as you start to try and get pregnant. Because instead of going to test every single woman out there of the reproductive age to figure out, if they are deficient. And also the other factor here is that, for some women, as I said before, most women actually conceive without trying. So because in the general population, that's what's going on, you have those kind of public health messaging ads, either because pharma companies want to make money and they can just put their multivitamin out there in the ads for women to just go and buy. And the government also supports that, because it's like, well, it's good for the population. So that's something that's just going to be done. And it's going to be rolled out as a public health intervention and as a recommendation from the GP's office to, a person trying to get pregnant. So that's typically why those things don't get tested. But here's what I will say. If somebody is having difficulty, whether it's difficulty conceiving or difficulty keeping a pregnancy to term, then it might become very useful to test further. And I'll explain this. I often treat patients who have been in those situations, who, for example, have specific reasons for me to think that they might be deficient in certain types of nutrients. Like, I've treated vegetarians for many years, right? So when a vegetarian of 15 years comes to me with recurrent miscarriage, immediately I'm thinking amino acid deficiencies. Which ones? It's not whether it's existing, it's which ones are deficient. Right. I remember once treating a lady who, to this day, she had the most efficient amino acid testing profile that I have ever seen. And like, some of her amino acid profiles were so deficient, they were like 3% of what they should have been, right, in terms of overall kind of measures. And when we treated and we got her, very specific amino acid prescriptions, and she took that for several months, and that test came back normal finally. She then went on to not only get pregnant, but keep a pregnancy to term after having had multiple miscarriages. So, sometimes it's a matter of, like, if there is a problem, then we investigate and dig deeper into what else could be going on, so that we can make the correct recommendation based on the issue and the case that's in front of me. Because, for example, that same recommendation wouldn't be applicable to somebody who eats meat 5 times a week, because it's very unlikely that they're going to have an amino acid deficiency. They could have other issues right, that are playing a role in their situation. If they have, let's say, some other kind of clotting factor, or if they could be having other issues that are going to be happening because of their lifestyle, but essentially it will be differential, right? It will be different from somebody who has a particular way of living or a way of being compared to somebody else who might not be. And that's also why it's difficult to just kind of get one size fits all recommendation across every woman that's having difficulty conceiving, or every woman who has experienced a miscarriage, and this is the ABC of what you should do, because different people are going to be different and they're going to be affected differently.
Is there foods or supplements that you generally recommend to everyone, whether or not they've had that sort of diagnostic testing going? So if somebody's like, okay, well, I'm thinking about it, I don't have any reason to believe anything's wrong, but I'd really like to support this pregnancy, what do you recommend to them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that overall we have to start with the basics, right? And the basics is the healthiest, freshest, most unprocessed diet as you can possibly have, that is ideally organic wherever possible. Or if organic is not accessible, then we look at the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 lists, for example, from the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, and look at what are the things that are really super high in pesticides that we need to avoid, and what are the things that essentially we can still have that are going to be pretty okay. So then it's looking at how else do we minimize other health potentiating concerns. Basing meals on vegetables and protein, enough protein about the size and the thickness of the palm of your hand. If you are a meat eater, chicken, fish, making sure that it's the small fish, making sure that it's not something that's going to be ideally heavily laden with heavy metals. Typically very big fish are going to be problematic. So we want to kind of like deep ocean sea fish that are small, chicken organic wherever possible. Again, meat a couple of times a week if possible. That's, a general kind of, and basing meals on vegetables and protein, because we want to avoid as much as possible. I still to my patients, because most people who experience miscarriages could be having an impact that is immunological. So when the immune system starts to overreact, sometimes environmental concerns or environmental things that happen in the environment, whether it's an exposure through diet or another type of exposure, and diet is our most kind of prevalent exposure, because guess what? We all eat every day, all day, right? And so the things that we are putting into our body our body can start to react to certain things. And food sensitivities happen typically on a threshold. So it's not a situation of you absolutely are or you absolutely are not food sensitive, unless you have something like celiac disease where you are gluten intolerant and you should never eat it. Incidentally, if you are gluten intolerant, your risk of miscarriage and infertility is going to be much, much higher. But if you have a sensitivity to those foods, gluten, dairy, and so on, eating enough of them so that it hits that threshold where you start to have symptoms can also have an impact on fertility and miscarriage. So then that's where we want to be looking at, how can we decrease any kind of overreaction by the system, by the body, to any of these things that are present in our day-to-day, whether they come from our food or whether they come from things that we put on our skin and so on. So when it comes to diet, typically I recommend to my patients, if they're struggling with infertility, miscarriage, etc., to do a gluten dairy-free diet as much as possible, to get tested for gluten sensitivity, because if they are highly sensitive or if they have celiac disease, to avoid it completely. And then the rest of the diet really, ideally, needs to be based on fresh foods, vegetables, and protein as much as possible. No more than 2 pieces of fruit a day, because another thing that can actually impact the ability to conceive and keep a pregnancy to term is insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes, all of those things will definitely make a difference. And it's something that we need to take into consideration. And when we're talking about diet, it's the best kind of intervention that we have for those types of health conditions. right? And of course, exercise. But when we're talking about, what to eat, we definitely want to be reducing any possible concerns that come in through our dietary patterns. But those are the types of things that, like coming back to what we said early in the conversation today, doing the best that we can to act pregnant now to get pregnant later and take home a healthy baby later, right? Which is all the things that you would absolutely start doing or that you would absolutely stop doing if you were pregnant right now. That applies to every aspect of what we're doing in our day to day.
Well, I know when I'm pregnant, I usually get my husband to cook most meals, so I think I'll implement that now.
I think that's a great strategy.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've brought today. I usually ask people to leave listeners with one thought or action to do to really ground this all into reality, but I love the one about act pregnant now to get pregnant later. Is there anything else you would add to that?
I think, a lot of times we're so too hard on ourselves. I think there's a lot to be said for do your best and, kind of let the heavens come to your aid, do your part and let the heavens come to your aid. I think that's a good principle to internalize.
Well, for listeners that want to connect with you, where's the best place to do that?
They can go to my website, which is fertilitybreakthrough.com, or they can search me on Google, which is Gabriela, Gabriela Rosa, Gabriela Rosa. And Fertility Breakthrough, the book, which is Fertility Breakthrough, Overcoming Infertility and Recurrent Miscarriage When Other Treatments Have Failed, is available free on YouTube. It's also available free on Spotify, and it's available in every bookseller around the world.
All the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/376. Your challenge for this week is to embrace what Dr. Rosa calls act pregnant now to get pregnant later. I really love this mindset shift because instead of obsessing over what's not happening, it kind of puts you back in the driver's seat. So pick one area of your life. Maybe it's switching to more whole foods, adding gentle movement to your day, simply being a little kinder to yourself when those really hard moments hit. Start treating your body like it's already creating the miracle you're hoping for. And remember, this isn't about pressure or perfection. It's about loving yourself enough to create the optimal environment for new life, whatever that looks like for you. And we know from all of the mindset and manifestation work that we've done in the past, there is something to be said about being in the version of you that you're trying to become. So just try to trust the magic a little bit. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. You can also find all of my incredible sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And speaking of transformation, I have something really powerful brewing for the new year that I cannot wait to share with you. I am creating a way to bring the deep, life-changing work that I usually reserve for my private coaching into a format that's accessible to really everyone in our Mind Love community. So if you want to be the first to know about it, make sure that you're on my email list. Just sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.